Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm really excited to be speaking with Professor Andy Lane. Andy, great to have you on.
Thanks, Dan. And what a tremendous show you've put together. I have been enjoying listening to this for a while now. I usually listen to it on a run, and so the shows are good enough for 2 runs normally.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honoured and delighted. I know you've been really, really kind with some of the things that you've put out on Twitter about the shows. I always say if this podcast is successful, it's due to the brilliant guests I've had on, and I've had some wonderful guests throughout the last few years. So I'm glad it's accompanied you on your runs. Has it helped you run quicker?
Oh no! It helps me run slower.
Is that a multitasking thing?
No, just to dive in there, the nature when you're trying to concentrate on something specific like information like this, you can't concentrate on running hard. When you run hard, all of your senses go towards the act of running hard. It's why music isn't functional at high intensity exercise, only slightly below that. And in order to concentrate and think and take into the arguments, I run slower. In fact, even better than that, I stop and do some stretching when someone says something really interesting and give it a think about. So it helps me recover and relax and start the day. Quite a few of those tweets I've come back from the run, because I would tweet it on run, but I am so poor with technology that I can't actually tweet off the phone very well. And I'm thinking the one on goal setting is absolutely fabulous about challenging the SMART principles. So this is really good, and people should be listening to this because the SMART principles are infiltrated so many bits of daily life where people are told to do smarter goals. And I know from when I'm setting goals for myself and for colleagues in research and consultancy is that where you don't know something, to set a specific goal around that, other than working really hard to solve it, is really difficult to when someone says, can we have an outcome for that? It's can I boldly go where no man's gone before? Is my response, and so you think, well, I'm glad to see that as materialised in something, with a bit more teeth to it.
Well, that was the podcast with Dr. Christian Swan on goal setting and critiquing smart goal setting, as you say, and you're straight into the sports psychology golden nuggets there. And I'm going to try. I'm going to hold you back. I'm going to do the responsible hosting job here. Hold you back and say, well, look, this is awesome already, and you've captured my attention already. So let's just start where we always start. I know everybody listening in from the world of sports psychology will know you and know your work very, very well and been heavily influenced by your work. But those who are less acquainted with sports psychology would, I'm sure, love to know who you are. So tell us a little bit about yourself, if that's okay, Andy.
That's an awfully kind thing to say. I'm Andy Lane. I'm a professor of sports psychology at the University of Wolverhampton. I've been at Wolves for 22 years. Before that, I was at Brunel University, which was West London Institute. I did the whole suite of degrees there, from undergraduate to PhD. Before that, I was a builder, and for 3.5 years building. I had terrible A-levels at art and sociology. I wanted to be a professional boxer at 18. I did that quite seriously. And then one rainy day, I thought, when I was off building, I looked at what course. I couldn't get on any courses. And West London Institute said being good at sport counts as an A-level. So I tried them and got in. And in terms of the academic thing was a complete disaster. The first few assignments were failed, but I did get better, and so I did get better for several years. And the effort investment, and so I got into research. I did my degree with Kostas Karageorgis, who's the famous music professor. Kostas, a brilliant researcher. And when I was doing my master's degree, he was finishing his PhD, and he was looking to publish. Pete Terry was looking to publish. I was dead motivated, and I'd collected a load of data, and I managed to publish 2 articles on an MSc, which helped me get the funded doctoral place. And I just ploughed on, really. I just sort of took each bit of test we're doing, put a lot of work into it, got publications, and so on. I think, and then you sort of move on. You end up being a professor before you know it, and so on.
Three Bs: boxing, building, and Brunel. And we don't have the first two Bs in common. But I would like to unpack those a little bit. But we have the Brunel in common, and Costas. Costas was my head lecturer when my master's degree at Brunel.
Oh wow!
So
I
yeah,
was the external examiner there for a while as well.
oh, that's why my marks were so poor. I've
No,
got you to blame. I'm joking. I'm joking. I did my master's degree at Brunel many years ago. I was a mature student, probably like yourself at the time. And we're going to go on and talk about a paper you did with the BBC and Michael Johnson, the famous American runner. But you've left the door open now. I'm fascinated here. I mean, I don't know whether to start with the boxing or the building. Let's start with the building. So you were a builder, but how comes the world of sports psychology came into view? Was it just it was? Did you go back and do a sports science degree first?
yeah. The 1988, there weren't that many sports degrees, so I looked in what course and applied for sports. I did sports studies and history to start with as a joint degree.
Okay.
I did sports psychology modules with Peter Terry, and
Yeah.
I love and Peter he's a fabulous lecturer. He'd come back from he'd been working with bobsleigh and he'd been working in the Olympics, and you'd get those. He'd talk about what was going on, and from my own perspective, is that as a boxer, I knew we're control of emotions, control of concentration, managing thoughts such as being killed and wanting to hurt the opponent had to be rationalised. And as you get into the academic study of that, you suddenly start getting a framework for how people can think and how they can change their thinking. And actually, that this isn't an act. This isn't. It's not random how people go into competition, how they think and feel. It can be planned. It can be a series of planned events. And you think, wow, what armory have you got for yourself and everyone else if you can get good at this stuff? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, from Pete's first few lectures, I was caught on this.
So that's really interesting. I mean, you're mentioning Professor Peter Terry there, who is a giant in the world of sports psychology now. Is based down under, isn't he? He's in Australia, and that's really interesting. So you had boxed seriously, and I suppose when you were listening into what Professor Peter Terry had to say, and he was returning from the Olympics and working with high level sports people, it immediately clicked with you. Did it, when you reflected back at your boxing and thought, oh, wow, were you thinking if I had done this, if I had had the opportunity to engage in this, it would have made a difference, a positive difference to my capacity to compete as a boxer?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. The whole approach to psyching yourself up, arousal control, what to concentrate on, and I've done boxing coaching. I've worked in consultancy with boxers. It's nothing. I don't do what I saw so many errors in how I was doing it, and so many different ways of doing it, and in essence, a big goal conflict at that point. In that, I sort of committed then to doing a degree, and got really into it. But you can't half box. You can't box and do something else as equally important. Boxers will catch this on it. It's all or nothing in that sport. You've got to be all in it, and it's very hard to have any secondary thing that's really serious that's going to compete against your time. And then you also start to think that, and I'd gone through this process, is where am I going as my boxing? I'd boxed lots of people boxed people who later won world titles, and I kind of knew that I wouldn't ever be that good. And therefore, I would get to a better level. I might win some titles, not too dissimilar to what I won, but around that point. And I certainly knew the nutrition parts I'd learned from that would get me much better. But I didn't think I'd ever get to be that good in order to justify what it might cost me in terms of where I'm going, in terms of the degree.
And sorry, when you looked around and you said, I'm not going to be that, when I was a pro golfer, there were there were mates I was playing with who were knocking it into 2 or 3 foot 4 times around, and I was
Yeah.
struggling to hit the greens. And you're thinking, yeah, no, I need to go and do something else here. As an aspiring boxer, was it that you were looking at fighters and going, whoa, that boxer is just too quick, too strong. If I get in the ring with that person, then I've got no chance at all. Is that what you mean by that?
Not. I mean, I never thought that. I always think. I mean, you can always give a good go, but it's the ability to win world titles, the ability to win British titles, to build a successful career of knocking people out, and so on. I was quite good, but not that good, and I knew that.
Not strong enough, not fast enough.
Um, I didn't punch hard enough. I didn't have a devastating punch in order to be able to knock people out or at the better level.
Yeah.
And you need that. So every contest would be an absolute war of attrition, endurance, and to do that every single time is difficult. And to do that every single time as a pro would be really, really difficult. So you'd be going in for every contest at the end would be go the whole distance. And at some time you get caught out by some. You meet people and they are so strong for their weight. You just realise that they're better than you.
Right. Okay, that's
And it's
interesting.
a brutal way to find out.
The end of that strong punch. Yeah, I mean, I think I've on the Sports Psych show we've had one ex UFC fighter. He was a very good UFC fighter, Frank Shamrock, who was dominant in the early part of the 21st century in the octagon. So very, very good. And the one thing I asked him was, do you think everybody can get in that octagon and compete? And he said yes, but I'm a bit skeptical about it, because I mean, that kind of, again, I would come back to this idea of approach behavior, avoidant behavior. I don't think everybody has it in them almost from a trait perspective to go in there and have the extraordinary will to hurt the person in front of them, or just to be able to engage in approach under that level of pressure, rather than to be, as opposed to being inhibited, in the ring or in the octagon as a consequence of being in a fight. What's your thoughts on that? I almost think there's got to be surely a bit of a trait-like characteristic in a person to fight front foot with a beast in front of you.
Yeah, look, I think the point, anyone can get in there. Lots of people get in there and learn to overcome the nerves to do so. Can people flourish in there with great? I mean, no. Some people have been. Yeah. I've seen some very talented boxers who have never been very good at winning contests.
Okay.
Because when it comes to the actual contest, they don't seem to they don't pull it together. They don't show enough assertiveness to be able to stamp their authority over the other person in order to win the contest. You really, really need to want to win, and in order to want to win, you really need to be prepared to put up with an awful lot to what's going to hurt to yourself and be an ability to hurt others. But you don't think of it in terms of hurting others, but you have to be prepared to do so. Yeah. And the reflection of that later is sometimes quite difficult to come to terms with. But you are hurting people. You are, and on the point when you see them hurt, that get a boxer who's psyched up will be a good boxer. That is a massive dose of arousal. Yeah. That energizes them to see them hurt.
Yeah.
And that in itself feels wrong a lot of the time when you look at it post-event, and that's coming to terms with that's quite difficult. But there is that part of that has got to be part of your psyche in order to be able to put up with that. Very difficult to train.
Yeah.
Very difficult to coach. Very difficult to coach.
I suppose it's just for me, the fear of getting hurt would be the overarching factor for me getting in the ring, and I know as a consequence I would be inhibited. I would be just fraction, even if it's just fractionally inhibited, it would just slow me down. I mean, my I just don't think I could execute skills under pressure in that slightly inhibited, even if it's, as I say, just a slightly inhibited state. It would just
Yeah, but you build people up to this in that a good boxing coach will not put someone into an open spar very early on. The first time they actually spar, when someone's throwing a punch at them, it should be really controlled, and they should be taught how to block, and it should be really, and therefore
of course.
you're not worried about getting. You have a skill set that makes you be able to cope. Only box. You have a skill set that makes you be able to cope. You're matched against an opponent who's similar to you, and therefore you go in with the more I did it and the more I've worked, you go in with a plan based on your skills, knowing that you can avoid punches. The goal is to avoid punches and land punches, and the more you can do that, the better it can be. Sometimes there's you have to put pressure on the person in order to force them to punch, and therefore you run the risk of getting hit, which was very much my style, because almost everybody I boxed was taller than me, so I had to go forward in order to force them to lead, to get round them, to throw punches, which sometimes, I boxed in the national schoolboy championship, and the person was on his fourth championship, and they said he's a tall southpaw, and I was about 5'6" at the time. I'm not much taller than that now. And then they pointed him out to me, and he was at 6'2". And he's throwing his punch from a southpaw to the other side, and it hit me before he'd come out of his corner. I thought this, and it hit this straight right at the start. I thought, wow, we are in for some time here now. And you don't think, wow, this is going to be hard.
Andy, did you win that fight?
No. I didn't. I lost on points.
You got through it.
Oh, I got through it, and the plan which we'd worked on was you had to get close to the boxer and then really work them on the inside. I think I was on my 15th fight, and he was on his 70th, something like that. So he had a massive experience on me.
Hey, look, I so want to get onto this piece of research, and I'm being very selfish here, but I am fascinated with the psychology of fighting sports. I've got one more question for you. Well, somebody once said to me, it was actually somebody who was involved in boxing, who I actually lectured when I was doing some lecturing, and this person said to me, because I was actually talking about something that we're going to go on to talk about today, if-then planning. You could also describe it as mental contrasting, just actually considering what you're going to do, planning for if it goes wrong. And this person said to me, rightly or wrongly, hey, as a boxer, this kind of if-then planning or mental contrasting, you can't do that, because you wouldn't step in the ring if you start to consider it going wrong. And I have mixed feelings about that. Now, as we've already worked out, have not been a boxer and would have no intention to. But as a sports psychologist, a big part of, lots of questions I ask competitors is, if it goes wrong, what are we going to do? What are you going to do? How do you plan for that? Again, as we're going to go on and talk about today. But can boxers do that? Would it raise the volume of fear for them if they consider getting hit, getting beaten up in round one, and so on and so forth?
Well, if-then planning works by having the best solution to the problem come to mind. So a scenario is if this happens, if the person comes out and hits you really hard, then what are you going to do? Well, you want to have some plans around that. And what you want is the plan to be the best plan for that opportunity, not to one later going, I wish I'd have done that, I wish I'd have done that, I wish I'd have done that. So if-then planning would be, well, what are your greatest concerns? So you go, okay, what are your greatest concerns then? Because if you haven't got any concerns, that's not true, because your other opponent is trying to hit you. So therefore, what are your concerns of getting tired? The person will have them, and they will then say what they are, and then say what is your best preferred solution to that, because that's what you want in your mind. When that cue comes, if-then plan cues the solution in, and so there you want the best solution in your mind to act on at the point where the problem's cued.
And I absolutely, I think the point this person was making was that they wouldn't even step in a ring if they start to consider getting beaten up. Now, I agree with you, but I suppose now I'm fairly well versed that what sports elite competitors project to the world and say to the world and through the press, let's say, is different to what happens in the conversations and the training they do in their inner circle. But obviously, you listen to boxers and MMA fighters speak, and it is obviously they're trying to portray a sense of there's no chance I'm going to lose this. But what I'm hearing you say is they will consider things going wrong, what they're going to do if it starts to go wrong, if they get hit, if their plan isn't working. This person was saying, well, no, Dan, no way, because they wouldn't even get in the ring. What you're kind of agreeing with me, which is, well, I'm not too sure about that. The best, surely.
What they definitely do is they do the then part, and they may not admit the fact that I get what the person's saying is that what they don't want to do is create a scenario that says I'm prepared. I've actually thought about losing, of course. But you then go, well, what is really driving you to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go for a run? What is driving the intensity of you on the bag? What's driving the intensity of you on all the rest of the training? It is part of it is being in the fourth round with 90 seconds to go and feeling exhausted. Because you will signal that to the other opponent, and then what will happen if that happens? What will happen? And you'll say it won't happen. Well, that's good because you have anticipated that happening because you're training so hard to prevent it from happening. So you've thought it through, and it's in your actions right now. So good. But I'm sure one of the reasons boxers train so hard is because those scenarios of being tired and brutally exposed are terrifying. So not terrifying in the way that can be scared, but where so much of self-esteem is tied into success at sport, it is, and where success can be so humiliating to be knocked out.
Andy, I could talk about this all day, and perhaps we'll continue that conversation at another point in the future on another episode. But I'm really keen to explore some of your fantastic research that you've done, and one of which I think stood out to both of us in terms of bringing you on the Sports Psych show and having a productive conversation around sports psychology, psychological skills, was the work you did with none other than the BBC and also with Michael Johnson, the former American runner. And basically this piece of research investigated online psychological skills training to enhance competitive performance. Do you want to introduce us to this piece of research? How did this start? Where did this come from? And as an overview, before we do a deep dive into it, sort of what was the purpose of the study?
Well, the aim, and it was with the BBC Lab UK have done those projects to bring science to the public. The Great Personality Test was the one on TV, and it's in that theme. It was in the science part of the BBC Lab UK. 2012, you got the Olympics, and I was. The BBC came to me via conversation I had with Professor Greg White. Greg White, who anyone knows, just swum 150k in 3 days. 55-year-olds aren't meant to do that. Wow. Greg is superhuman. Yeah. And he went to Brunel with me at the same time, by the way, in terms of your friends and colleagues from when you start as an undergraduate coming through. And Greg was saying, well, the BBC want to do a study on, the BBC Lab UK wanted a study on sports psychology. And so we started a conversation with the BBC Lab UK about what could be done. And for me, they said, be imaginative as you like. Don't worry about the resources.
Nice.
So you go, and it really was when I started talking about it. They go, no, that's not big enough. That's not imaginative enough. And they go, oh, and they were brilliant to work with because they were so positive all of the time across the whole process. They were so positive. Yeah. Even in some parts where we were really up against it, and in some real parts where we were under real pressure. It was really good fun. They said, and I said, okay, well, what about looking at psychological skills and performance? And they would go and performing under pressure. And we're trying to. We kind of came to that, and one of the constraints, it has to be done online. It has to be done it has an option to be done on a really old computer. So you're going back to 2012, the technology is a bit further back.
Yes.
And so we thought, well, actually, as they said, sample size. Don't worry about that. I mean, when we were developing this, they said, we'll pilot this because we developed a game. So we'll pilot this. So I said, we'll get sample size. And I said, okay, then. And then they developed a rough version of it. And then about 4 hours later, they said, we've got, 500 or something. And so we talked about psychological skills. And one of the dilemmas there is that within the sport psychology world, is that sports psychology often involves a relationship between the practitioner and the client. And you're abandoning that to some degree, or you're abandoning that to complete degree here, to a point. A contrast to that is because I was working on a project, with a big ESRC project with colleagues at Manchester and Sheffield, where If Then Planning comes from. For her, and in health, organisational psychology and educational psychology, where online interventions were absolutely the norm. So my colleague Warren Mansell was developing online therapy, and so he's going, and he's showing me this game and way of therapy that they're developing. You think, well, oh, wow, there is some value in here in just thinking this through, knowing that the sports psychology world may not be a bit off at this. But they're flipped to this. And I thought, I get that. And I get all of the parts about the therapeutic relationship with the client and the practitioner. And I don't think we're even touching that. Because then I'm thinking, well, actually,
yeah.
And the BBC were keen. One of the big things about the BBC was make this educational enjoyable. And I think, hold on. If I was a nutritionist and I said, well, I think everybody needs to know about macronutrients and what's a healthy diet and what's a not so healthy diet. If I'm a strength and training conditioner, I'll tell people how to get stronger, how to get cardiovascularly fit. I'll just give them the information. If I'm a sports psychologist, why don't I just give people a simple way of learning about goal setting theory, a simple way about introduction to imagery, a simple introduction to self-talk, and some skills which we can introduce in a brief way that makes it enjoyable. And it's interesting then when you go, and I've been looking at this of how long does it take to learn to be any good at self-talk, and what is a good manual for learning self-talk? How long does it take to be good at imagery, and what's a good manual for doing that? And there is some research on that, but that process of how do we learn is somewhat missing. It's somewhat within some of the educational psychology and health psychology. They'll say, well, you do 10 weeks of this. We put them through 6 weeks of this. And you go, right, okay. And we know how people learn is they have a go at something and they get feedback on it. And if they want to, your pod with Ericsson's stuff on challenge it's so interesting, all of that, because then in order to learn, you have to really want to learn. In order to really want to get better, you have to really put yourself under difficult conditions and really reflect about what you need to do next and operationalise every bit of resource you possibly can. And so you think, how can we make this fun and learning? So we set about. And BBC were very good to say this has got to be a good study as well, not just a game, but with those contrasting approaches. We set about to test different psychological skills and or techniques, imagery, if-then planning, arousal control, and self-talk. And then we looked at whether they could have a different focus. So we then looked at self-talk if it's focused on the outcome, if it's focused on the process, if it's focused on arousal control, or if it's focused on instruction. So that gives you 12 conditions, of which normally 12 conditions is, oh my God, we'll never be able to analyse the stats on this. We're never going to get enough. And then but we did, and we talked. In developing these, this was quite good fun as well. We mocked up versions of this so that students can do it. On open days, we did it. On a science project at the Manchester Museum, we had the public trialling it out and giving us feedback and saying what they would and wouldn't do. We had kids who were good with computers having a go at it. So it was a great one to take in and just get feedback from people. And I mean, since then, you've looked at the gaming research and crikey, there's so much we could do here. And interesting, you look at the military research and aviation, where simulation is all the way that people learn to perform. But we had the constraints of on a keyboard or a mouse, and so he developed a game where they had to, and it's like a concentration grid. They had to knock numbers out in a random order, one after another, simply because that works online. It's brief. It's one where the more psyched up you go, you're more likely to block out distraction, get focused in. So getting more emotionally aroused should be more beneficial to going quicker. We put some pressure on it by competing against an opponent. In order to individualise that, we gave them a practice round, and the score from the practice round then created an opponent based on their practice score. Just around that, and we had a lot of. I think we had 12 different levels in order to get that. So you then got your practice. You got your opponent. That was given a name. You competed at one screen. You had one screen to knock the numbers out. Your opponent competed. It went 3, 2, 1, go. And if you were behind, a sad face came up. If you were ahead, a happy face came up to try and give some feedback to the emotions people might be generating. We played slightly daunting music behind the back end of it. And that was, in essence, the project, in that people did a performance task 4 times. One was practice, 3 rounds of it, one without psychological skills, and one with 2 rounds with psychological skills, and we looked to see which one improved the most. We had a control group. The control group was just given information. You've done it once, just to go again. They didn't know they're in the control group. It was randomised based on date of birth, or randomised, or one of the letters in date of birth, something, just a number which would randomly land. Which we've seen. So I was in this project with the ESRC project, and one of our partners got difficulty on one of the articles that they're not being not randomised. So they gave lots of good advice around that, was how specific you'd need to be. So that's in essence was the game. People took part in what in essence was a concentration grid. We assessed their emotions beforehand. We gave them a psychological skill. We looked at changes in emotion and changes in performance.
Okay.
But the overall project wasn't quite like that, because it needed introducing, and it needed to capture, it needed develop, it needed delivering. And so the BBC said, we were going to get to deliver this. I said, well, who have we got? And they said, what about Michael Johnson? And I said, well, and they said, he's got a contract from the BBC. He'll be coming over in April. So we'll get him to record it. And then they said his fee. And I said, what about my fee? And they said, your fee is free. I said, thanks for that one. And they said, well, but he got a fee, and rightly so, because that's his job. And what we got from, in terms, because sometimes the university and sometimes others said, well, how much did you get for this project? We all did. All of our time was for free. All of their time was for free. But the benefits of that, the exposure you've got from that, the amount of time they put into that, the actual cost was huge. They had a company built this game so that it ran off. Anyway, what we then had to do is write Michael's lines. And the test of credibility of a sports psych intervention. So you've written these lines on what he's going to read out on imagery, and then he gets to read them. And I remember the night he read them. He was coming over and read them. Oh my God, this could be, because the worst bit would then go, this won't wash. Because there he is, this super elite sports person going, nah, this is not going to be any good.
This makes no sense to me at all.
This makes no sense whatsoever.
I've won multiple gold medals, and you're talking rubbish.
There was that, the imposter syndrome that comes in, that when you get to do something really important and you really want it to work, you really want it to be good. And that one of the big things which about this project at certain times I experienced was, this is so big, why am I doing it? That bit is when you suddenly realise or face the sun of what you're doing, and you go, crikey, this is massive. We were writing the script on Google Docs, of which the BBC said we're doing it on Google Docs. I said, what's that? And they said, all right, we're doing it today and tomorrow, and so that's how long you've got to learn how to use it. And we were doing this on a Friday night. Michael's coming over the Saturday and revising it, so you could see them typing a bit. And I'm going, no, you can't say that. And they said, but this doesn't make sense. And this was going to about 3 a.m. We were getting this, getting it. And I was thinking, well, and then I went to bed and I come back at 5 o'clock. I woke up about 5 o'clock because on the Saturday I was still doing park run. And I saw on the Saturday, and they put urgent. There's a few texts going. I've gone and tweaked it. And then again later, about 7:30, they've gone through. And then at 10 o'clock, I've got back, and we're still doing it. So there must have been a team of them in this. There was a team of people, I think, in a room doing stuff or around on their own computers. And I've gone to bed, and they've gone. Oh, they hadn't agreed for me to stay up, but they were just working hard to get it right.
Yeah.
That degree of we're going to work really hard. And now that was I added that was the fun. That was a big part of the fun of the project because they took it so seriously.
Yeah.
And we got Michael then recorded the scripts, and I mean on this, what we also did was we wanted to provide feedback to people. So one of the parts was people filled in the emotion regulation questionnaire, which gives reappraisal and suppression scores. So we had those scores, and we then categorised them for being reappraisal or suppression. We then we then categorised that in terms of whether it was high in it or low in it, and then when they scored at the end, they got videos personalised against their scores across their reappraisal and suppression. They got personalised videos against when we asked them what emotions. Think of your best performance. How did you feel? And they rated their emotions, and whatever emotions they reported as was the highest, we provided feedback on that. So we wrote around that. We then provided feedback on the consistency of their performance, the success of their performance, whether they beat their personal best scores on that. So they got a graph, consistency. And so what you had then was multiple different options. For each different option, you had to write a script. And when in doing so, I found this really helpful because it helps you clarify how you work generally, in that if you are forced to go, well, what does that mean? Is that what people have scored that? You've now got to say what it means, and you've got to say what it means really clearly and briefly. It's either high or low. It's either good or bad. It's either. But if it's neither, why is it in there? What if you've got it in there? Why is it in there if we can't offer any useful information to someone coming back? And good doesn't mean you're going to perform better, but good means what can you say to someone that will help them in terms of knowing? Because one of the goals is knowing something more about themselves at the back end of it. Having done this test, people then got feedback on whether when they perform well, they're angry, and so they'd get feedback. If someone put that they perform well, they're angry, as some people did, then they got feedback. You performed really well when you're angry, and the feedback would say that's quite good. Sometimes it helps you generate intense emotions and arousal, but be careful of that. That anger can sometimes spiral inwards and become really negative, and the inner thoughts are often quite unhealthy. So we pitched it all around, partly some really good feedback, partly also as education as possible. And that as a package, because I ran this loads of times in lectures, and loads of times you'd go to people, and my mum did it, and my brothers did it, and loads of people did it. All the feedback was fantastic. I think there was an open bit where people could give feedback to at the end. I think we've got 50,000 words of such beautifully positive stuff on the experiences people have. It's heartwarming when people say this was really engaging and I used this. And when people like school teachers said they took it to their class and all the kids had a really enjoyable lesson, they learned more about themselves. They learned that not necessarily, but everybody feels anxious and so on. So I mean, from that perspective of putting sports psychology to the public, giving them an experience, allowing them to giving feedback on that in terms of did they perform better or not. was really useful, really, really useful, and so much fun to do. And I mean, going on about it, then we had the build up to so we've got this package built with the Michael Johnson's narration of all the videos and feedback all connected, and we've got launch day. I think it's May the 1st, 2012. And they said, right, on the day of the launch, they said they'd lined me up to go and bit on the radio in Birmingham. So I said, okay, I'll go into Birmingham. And then I was lined up to do about 5 different regional ones. And we also did TV there. So I was there for most of the day. And they also had, I love doing that, by the way. I thought this is fantastic. And we're communicating what sports psych is, and people are asking relevant questions. I get nervous. Is that a good or bad thing? And you can give a chat to people about that, and it's good. It's good. It stops it being a mystery. But This is someone speaking to someone. It's quite normal. Yeah. You can do things about your anxiety if you want to. You can certainly alter your thoughts around that. Is it all negative? No, it's not, and so on. They were getting some help. It was launched off the One Show. This was funny. And they said, "Oh, we're going to launch off the One Show. Do you want to go on the One Show?" I said, "Do I want to go on the One Show? I'm straight there."
For those who don't know the One Show, it's a big BBC show in the UK, isn't it?
It is. 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. So it's prime time. Millions watch it. Essentially.
Millions watching.
So you went on the One Show?
No, I didn't. I got rather than Michael Johnson and I going on, and it was Michael Johnson and Ricky Gervais.
You got dumped for Ricky Gervais. Outrageous. I can't believe it, Andy. Can't believe
Ricky Gervais. That's what I thought, yeah. And the BBC were about 6 o'clock were going, what? Because Ricky Gervais had to go on the game.
Okay.
So you go, oh no, we've got Ricky Gervais. He's funny. I think he's really funny. Afterlife is one of my favourite programmes. And I didn't know that then, but I don't want him ruining my project. And so the BBC people were it's quite a fun but slightly nervous chat around how this might go because it's live. But I mean, that you can find that episode on YouTube. But it went well, and you got the exposure. People could see what it's all about. Michael Johnson saying it's a good thing to do across the airways, and then you've got the data. So going into that, we had about 15,000 people, and going out from that, we had about 50,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And they said, you'd have got 3 times that, but it got such a rush, a load of the servers crashed.
So you could have been looking at 100, because in the end, I think your numbers in the research were just over 44,000. So you could have had around about 150,000.
That's it, yeah. The whole data set's got, I think, 70,000 about.
Okay.
There's 45 completely complete.
Yes.
Gotcha. And that's not a very good bit of. If Costas is listening, he'll have me on that completely complete. There'll be a green pen coming through the airways on that. What you needed in order to be in that first study data set, you need to have a sound card in your computer to get all the sound. And one of this is why the BBC guys were so good. They said, "Oh no, we'll program that in. We'll know who's got sound, who's not got sound." And
extraordinary, yeah.
And they said, well, that's fantastic, because what that means is that you, instead of having 70 and a load of people who should be in the intervention groups, but couldn't have been in the intervention group because they couldn't have heard it.
Yeah, wow.
They're out, straight out. We found that the keyboards were when people who didn't use the mouse were much slower than people who didn't use people who used the keyboard were much slower than the mouse. And so we just separated them. I think there's about 5,000 of those. So, but we also knew how long someone. So if someone was doing the whole game, so if someone did it and then went off for an hour, then we know that. So they were out. You had to have done it a continuous go. Mm. So you couldn't have had game go number 1 and then go off and have an hour's rest and come back. You had to just do it continuously. So you're chopping people off. Which means that what you've got is that sounds terrible in some regards, but an element of control. If you actually did the study and you had people in the same room, if they went out, you'd go, well, you're out, aren't you? But you've got virtual ways of going, actually, no, that doesn't count. Well, it does count for something. That doesn't count. For this first study we did, which we published, which in essence tested the central hypotheses, we only collected the clean. We only left the clean data in. We've since used in another study we published this year all the people for whom took part in the study but didn't have sound cards or skipped the interventions. Because a lot of people got interventions, but they skipped them. So, but that's fine.
Okay.
What a beautiful natural control group you've got there. They're not a control group because they're not being randomly allocated, but they've gone through the whole experience, and you can then go, well, how did they compare against people who clearly had a motivational difference, actually wanted to experience these, and the extent to which, if you want to do it, it might be it might be a placebo that I've done this, so it's going to make me better. Therefore, I'll try harder, not to do with what's being spoken. But you've got that ability to go, well, what about that? And I continue to do that with the data set because I present at the ECSS this year, more data. And I do it for most conferences now. You dive into this and you can fish out, what about the really nervous? What about the people who are really using reappraisal? What's the deep dive into those people? And you can do all of those things, which you can't normally do, because whenever you do a deep dive into someone quite small, you haven't got enough people.
So before we dive into those results, what you actually discovered here. So my understanding in very, very simple terms is that it was essentially a test-retest protocol here, and that you were training in between the test-retest 3 psychological skills: imagery, self-talk, and if-then planning. I suppose through the prism of 4 different focuses. So you are helping people work on their imagery, self-talk, and if-then planning through the prism of outcome goals, process goals, instruction, or arousal control. That's my understanding. Mm-hmm. You certainly captured data for at least 44,000 people, the clean data, as you'd call it. Michael Johnson was heavily involved. He introduced this, and it was an opportunity for people to become self-aware around, how they experienced emotion under pressure, and subsequently how that influenced performance. That's what I'm hearing you say there. So you can give me a yay or a nay there, and also, so what were the results here? What did you discover?
That is a yay. The results were that the use of psychological skills around the use of imagery and self-talk had the strongest effect on raising activated emotions, making people more highly aroused and feeling energetic. And feeling more energetic made associated with investing more effort and going slightly quicker. In other words, performing better. So it seemed that the intervention had an incremental effect on psychological states and performance over the control group. And of those, the interventions that raised arousal were the most effective, as you might expect. Interestingly, the control group were better than some of the instruction groups. Now, the instruction groups performed worse, and if-then instruction performed worse. And at one point think, maybe instruction isn't very good. But you go, no. Instruction might be absolutely the golden nugget, which might be in some context. But for this task, we weren't giving very good advice. And so you can go, actually, it may not, you are testing different interventions, but before people go too far as to go, well, this one's better than that. This one's better than that in this task, I think is what you need to say. And for learning about about these interventions, don't think that's better than that. Just that's better than that for a task where getting aroused is better. And when you're doing that from a state where people are not very aroused to begin with.
Can you just unpack that quickly for us? Because you're using this term aroused, and obviously that conjures up all kinds of different images for people listening in. Yeah. Can you just explain that for us a little bit?
Yeah, it would be emotional state, feeling activated, energetic, not fatigued.
Yeah.
In essence. and they're in essence the items that people are scoring on.
So that's interesting to me. So this is a concentration grid essentially, and what you're saying is that interventions, so psychological skills, the targeted activation, energy, readiness, if you like, actually those those interventions, those skills demonstrated or were related to the improved performance the most out of everything. Is that, did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How come? I mean, it's a concentration grid. How does that work? I get it if it's like football. I get it if it's basketball. Why do you think that's the case for concentration grid?
Because you are narrowing down your field of attention.
That's what happens as you become more aroused, more energetic.
Yeah, and that's helpful, I think, in this task because you're just trying to concentrate harder, and staring at the screen without really looking for it. The numbers don't fly out at you.
It's interesting. I get that because I mean, I immediately think of my master's degree and Easterbrook's cue utilization theory, and as in the saber-toothed tiger comes around the corner, and we experience higher emotion or increased arousal, and our attention narrows in order to potentially help us fight or flight. But I think potentially to the layperson, they would always consider, or if they really thought about it, they might always consider increased arousal in a task that's quite sedentary would be possibly to the detriment of performance.
But the sedentary in terms of gross actions, but not sedentary in terms of speed. It's still a speed. It's a race.
Gotcha.
You are in a race.
Yes.
And the remember is that they've gone in very low in arousal.
Yes.
So and this is the flip, is that if you've got somebody in a before a competition where they're already quite stressed, this may not be the right, doing this may not be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And the reducing arousal was very good. It worked. It made them less. It reduced their arousal. And if you pick the people who are a bit stressed at the start, because you've got loads of those, it reduced them quite a lot. They didn't perform that work. They didn't really change their scores that much, but they would have if they've gone in feeling a bit fatigued, depressed, and tense, and that scores have gone down. That's what seemed to show that they probably felt better, but that wasn't driven as an outcome on this study at this point. But that's one of the things I'll come around to later on is we start going in. Well, hold on. What about the people who started this in an awful state? How did they come out in terms of in poor emotional state from the baseline scores? And how did they come about? What was their experience through the test be like?
Did you capture that data? Do you know?
Oh, it's all there. Yeah, I've just got to. It's then slicing it from just picking those people, calling them a group, and then having a look at them against comparisons. That's one of the beauty of this data set. One of the beauty of these data set is that you do study. We've published three studies of this now. You could keep going. And you almost not touch the sense. It's almost a different study each time, almost completely different data each time. From a personal perspective, having done this, trying to do any research thereafter felt like an anticlimax for a long period of time. Because it's interestingly, after doing this in 2016, I became an associate dean in this faculty for a few years. And I wasn't really sure of why I did that in many senses, because I've never been really that motivated for academic leadership. But I think on reflection, because I've just stopped doing that now, the reflection is that the research I was doing wasn't driving me as much as this study. It's so hard to come back from this.
And so what I'd love to understand is your own personal learnings from this, because we're talking imagery, we're talking self-talk, we're talking if-then planning and its influence on emotion and performance. And so what did you get out of this for yourself as a psychological practitioner, and what was the feedback from others? What do you think coaches could get out of reading this research and getting an understanding of psychological skills and their influence on emotion and subsequent performance?
Yeah, well, I picked all the interventions I picked, the ones I thought were going to be really good.
Okay.
So it really was one. These are my faves. These are things I think people should learn about, and I picked it from that perspective. So, what I got from that, you can make these type of interventions yourself. You can, within your work with people, and you can put these together for them. You can put these together with them, and it then becomes a really useful way to help people learn about this process, psychological skills, sports psychology, recapture what that go through how to do psychological skills.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really useful thing to do. We've done some other videos around this in running to try and to look at putting some of these things into another context, a specific sporting context.
Okay.
We've and it's not just about research on that; it's about having useful resources that people can use. I then did a project with you've had Carla on and Carla May and Dominic Micklewhite, the magnificent Noel Brick, and we've done a project which we looked at brief psychological skills for people to use, and particularly in running, where they just want something quite close to competition to try and help them in the right mindset. And we developed a whole load of resources around that, which it brings it to, I think about is that you've got a mass audience of people who want sports psychology. I'm not. If there were millions of sports psychologists who had lots of time, I'd say, well, we don't need to have a bridge. They all go on the internet and find stuff out. And I think from our job, and what you're doing so well with this podcast, you offer a way to access the right stuff to help people to learn it in a way that's quite useful. And that doesn't mean that because we've got a la-di-da title, it makes mine right. And I listen to lots of stuff on YouTube and lots of stuff on watch and listen to lots of stuff on sports cycle or any of these interventions, and there are some good stuff. But what you're trying to do, what I think I'm trying to do, is just say, I think this is a good one. We can build it into research. There'll be some evidence behind this, and therefore, at least it gets a stamp of authenticity about it.
What I love about this is, I come back to the amount of participants and the way this was delivered. And the reality of life is sometimes you do have to have somebody like a Michael Johnson or a similar sort of sporting celebrity to help people understand that, look, Michael Johnson would be saying, because I know a great deal of his work is based around promoting psychological skills or the mental side of sport. And, for people like that, for sports competitors like that to say, this is important, this works. And then to have something like this, something that's online, so pretty easily accessible, but it's underpinned by evidence-based or grounded or informed skills and processes, imagery, self-talk, if-then planning. I think the public at large don't necessarily know about this stuff. If they do, it's a little bit disembodied, it's a bit disjointed. So to give people the opportunity to experience these skills, utilize them in what is a competitive environment, and then to help them experience a sense of self-awareness as a consequence of being involved in this, I think is really, really powerful. I mean, obviously for us as sports psychologists, as you've emphasized throughout, using and it depends philosophy is important here. And Dr. Steve Ball, who came on the show quite some time ago, talked about, the art of being a sports psychologist is using the right skill or the right intervention with the right person at the right time. Well, that's for us as sports psychologists, but to the layperson, this was a wonderful opportunity, and I'm sure you'll do something else on this, but a wonderful opportunity to be exposed to the kind of stuff that we know works really, really well. But I think so many people globally get exposed to what they think is sports psychology, but it tends to be a bit motivational guru-esque. So this is brilliant. This is brilliant.
And I think people do a lot of this thing naturally.
Of course.
And that and one of the interesting parts is we assessed we had some measures of frequency of psychological skills, and people say they use them quite often. Yeah. What the quality of that and the context of that is completely unknown. And there is a bit of evidence that says those who used it more got more out of it. So if you were already regularly, if you said you used psychological skills, you tended to get more out of this project than if you didn't tend to use psychological skills. So the idea that the suggestion would be to start practicing to use them more, slightly evidence-based from that, which I think that is not a bad thing to suggest to people anyway. That the idea of reflection, having goals for the day that are not just goals that drive you to achieve something, help you say, I've had enough, I better stop now, are quite useful. Using imagery to think through the most difficult parts of the day and get your best version of you. So that if it is talking to a class of people or doing a business sale, you imagine yourself doing that, and again working through the narrative, and just all that sorts of preparation is useful. And you go, actually, why not do a bit of that? But why not, having done a bit, at some point check in with an expert to see where you're going? You wouldn't learn a sport. You'd never go, I'm going to teach myself how to be a tennis player, and never have a coach, would you? You might watch as many videos as you want, but you eventually someone go, just that. At some point, you check in with someone, and they'll make so much more progress to you.
Unless you're Nick Kyrgios.
I was going to say he hasn't got a coach.
Yeah, that's the exception.
He's had coaches, though.
He has. Of course he has. And I think all that stuff can get a little bit...
He hasn't got a sports psychologist, but he might want one of those as well at some point.
Well, maybe. I think... I think you're 100% right in saying that people do utilise these things. They just don't realise that they do. I mean, we're all engaged. I mean, we had Dr. Alex Latinjak on the show recently. He talked about spontaneous self-talk, and we all have spontaneous self-talk, and we will all be using goal-directed self-talk to manage our spontaneous self-talk, and we'll use keywords. I did a corporate gig recently where somebody said to me, not in an unkind way, actually a positive way, well, I'm looking forward to this. All I know about sports psychology is what I've learned from Ted Lasso. I don't know if you know Ted Lasso. It's a comedy, and actually, halfway through the day, halfway through the session, this person said to me, "Oh, actually, I've been using a lot of this stuff. I use my self-talk. I do have these keywords to get me into my best mental state to deal with a tough conversation or a difficult meeting." So people do use this stuff, and obviously I'm talking about outside of sport here. It's just helping maybe to formulate a specific way to utilize them, and it's trying to help them to use this more formally, perhaps in a more structured manner, so it perhaps is even more positively influences their capacity to manage emotions and influences their performance.
I think people can learn the skills. I think all kids should learn these skills.
Yeah,
but they probably won't. They'll need help in the context in which to apply them.
Yes,
and that I remember someone said to me, it was a footballer, I'm using imagery, and they said, I was using it within the game. I said, how did that go then? I said, the coach shouted at me. I said, I'd use it before the game if I were you. Just try that, and half time. And then maybe some at the end reflection, but maybe in the game, try and think about the here and now.
Yeah. Hey, last question. I'm dying to know, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I suppose two questions. What was the feedback from Michael Johnson? Again, I don't know if you know. Did you have any interaction with him? And obviously, my last question is, how did Ricky Gervais get on? I mean, I'm going to go on YouTube and have a watch. How did he get on with the test? And did it at least look like he enjoyed doing it?
All the feedback from Michael was really positive. That was the whole. He put his name to this in a very big way. So I didn't get to meet him, which is a bit of a shame. I'm based in the Midlands. He came to London. The BBC guys, this was the golden nugget for them. Ricky, no, he's on the One Show. He just talks about it. What we got was beautiful management from Michael Johnson of Ricky about how he talked about his little bits. I don't know how Ricky got on. What you also can't find from the data set is very easily is who is who.
Of course.
Although I can find myself on it.
Okay.
I've been there loads of times, but you can find yourself if you know what to look for, but you can't find anyone else.
Just imagine if we could get Ricky Gervais on board in terms of promoting psychological skills. There's a man who is highly skillful at what he does. He will definitely be utilising this stuff.
Well, I think he does, yeah.
Andy, this has been absolutely fantastic and absolutely fascinating. And, I'm really fingers crossed that there's opportunities you have in the future to do more stuff, because I think the more we can promote this to the public, as we've talked about in the last 15 minutes at least, is these are such important skills for young people at school, for people in the workplace, in the corporate environment, in the public sector, and obviously on the sports pitch. How can people find this paper, find you and follow you and learn more about your work?
Okay, they can find me on Twitter at Andy Lane 27. The joke being Greg White does it as well. I got to 27 and stayed that age. Obviously, that's a bit hard to say so now. I've only been 27, 28 times. It's at Andy Lane at 27 on Twitter, or the email me is the university one, which is a.m.lane2@wlv.ac.uk. But you can find it off their website. The Twitter's the best way though, and I engage quite a bit with. I think Twitter's those sorts of open forums for chatting with people are quite nice, so people can. They can chat away with me, and we can chat away with the thousands of others or hundreds of others or one or two others that look at Twitter that way. And I think that's quite nice. Lovely for students to see sensible conversation on Twitter. I don't engage in those I don't like you, you don't like me stuff on Twitter. It's always got to be positive. Life's too harsh for people to be harsh on Twitter, social media. The article is published in Frontiers, which was a deliberate choice because it's open, accessible for everybody.
Brilliant.
We didn't have to pay for it because Sheffield have got some deal with Frontiers, so that really grates me when you have to pay to publish. But it's on Frontiers. I've got the current views is 62,785. I'm looking at that now.
Wow. Just
type in brief online training. Frontiers, put my name and put Totterdale in, and it'll go there into Google. But it's March 30th, 2016. It's the first article, Performance Science in Frontiers.
Fantastic, Andy, brilliant. Thank you so much for today,
Dan. It's been an absolute. I've enjoyed it. I think it's a great show, and thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much. Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'll be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.